Hey everyone, I'm your host Adrian. We do content like this weekly, so hit the subscribe button and ring the bell to get notified. If you want more content like this, click the like button and please leave a comment. Thanks again for watching, and welcome to today's Rupa University Live Class, Rupa Live Class, presented by the all-new Rupa University, the best way to learn about specialty lab work from industry experts, just like Roger. My name is Adrian Martinez, and as always, I will be your host for this afternoon. Today, we have a very, very special guest in Roger Deutsch, CEO of Cell Science Systems, here to talk about inflammaging dangers, using the new Inflammaging profile for health and longevity. Before jumping in, a couple of very quick housekeeping items. Everyone joining will be muted by default, but don't fret. If you have any questions, please use that Q&A button down in the menu bar, and we'll go ahead and host a live Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Also, feel free to blow up the chat. If you have any questions or want to interact with each other, feel free to chat through there. Immediately following the Q&A, yours truly will show you exactly how to order tests from Cell Science directly on Rupa Health. And if you have to jump early, no worries at all. We are recording this session, and you'll be able to find it on rupauniversity.com within the coming days. Additionally, I'll go ahead and send out a recording along with the slides once we've had the opportunity to edit it at some point next week. And finally, if you are a fan of this type of content, be sure to check out rupauniversity.com to get access to all the previous sessions that we have done, including them with Roger. With that, let's jump in. I'd like to introduce Roger Deutsch. Roger is CEO and founder of Cell Science Systems. He has, for over 35 years, been active in numerous research projects involving cellular testing for sensitivities and nutritional assessment. He is a frequent lecturer and co-author of Your Hidden Food Allergies Are Making You Fat. Thanks so much for joining us, Roger. I'm super excited for today's conversation, and I'll go ahead and let you take it from here.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. First of all, I want to thank not only Adrian, but Rupa Health, who we've been working with for, I guess, over a year right now, and it's been wonderful. They're a fantastic group of people, so I encourage you to work with these guys. So I want to talk today about inflammaging and how we can measure inflammation and what we can do about it. Of course, aging has been something that people have been trying to prevent or retard or reverse for as long as there's been people. So now there's some science catching up with some of the newer understandings of what causes it and what we can do about it. And we're about to introduce a couple of new tests that help you quantify what the degree of inflammaging is and what then you can do about it. And before I begin, I just want to mention that this is a number of our collaborators. If you don't know Cell Science, we're a CLIA lab. We're also a FDA registered medical device manufacturer because we manufacture the ALCAT test. We invented that. We manufacture the instruments, reagents for that, and the cellular nutrition assays that we perform. Been recipients of several grants from the European Union and our local area in Brandenburg, Germany. Cooperate with several universities, some of them are listed here. And this is just to let you know that we're trying to do our best to advance functional medicine. The thing about aging is that really all the systems age, but fundamental are two particular systems, which are cardiovascular, that feeds and nourishes every part of the body, helps remove waste, and the immune system, which interfaces between us and everything else. So one of the concepts that I think is kind of foundational is that inflammation, rather sort of immunity, is something that we think we need strong immunity. Well, we're going to delve into what does it mean, strong immunity or weak immunity. But more than that, what we need is balance. And this was the cover of Science magazine, and the journal Science, rather, in January of 13. And what you see pictured there is a human lymphocyte, and superimposed upon it is a yin-yang sign. And if you don't know much about Taoist philosophy, probably most of you do, briefly, it's that everything's always changing, and we switch from yin to yang. And the yin is the more, it's cool, temperature-wise. It's more feminine. The yang is more aggressive, more hard, hot. So the thing here is applied to immunity is that we want the immune system to be aggressive when it needs to be aggressive to defend us. But you also, just as important, maybe more important, is that after inflammation has been resolved, or it's over, danger has been resolved, you have to restore tissue homeostasis. And that's done by the immune system as well. Also, Another philosophical perspective on immunity is from Vedic philosophy, where there's an element that describes three factors operating all the time in physicality, sattva, rajas, and tamas, and what they're associated with is creation, maintenance, and then destruction. And destruction is as important as creation because we have to get rid of the old in order to bring in the new. So those are going to be some kind of backdrop themes to the discussion today. And the points that we want to talk about are how inflammatory burden depletes immune resources, causes senescence of the immune system, decreases telomere length, which we'll touch on, and this drives cardiovascular, autoimmune, and other diseases that are associated with aging. So inflammation is a big factor here, and it can be caused by foreigners or also sterile factors, meaning environmental toxins or foods that we eat, or even debris that's not cleared from the system. One of the main things that's getting a lot of attention now in the research community is cell-free DNA, which means DNA outside the cell, which gets outside the cell following an immune response, which can result in necrosis or death of the cells, or another defense process called netosis, which is an acronym for neutrophil extracellular traps. And this is an active area of research. There's probably 5,000 or so publications you can see today on PubMed having to do with netosis. But the good news is you can test this and you can assess it, get a baseline, and then do your interventions, which would be lifestyle primarily. Could be pharmaceuticals, but we're mostly involved with lifestyle changes. And it can be reversed. Senescence can be reversed. So you can, if not turn back the clock, which I think you can do, you can certainly retard, slow down aging, increase the health span. That's the most important thing. So just as another sort of interesting aside, we're dealing now with COVID. And if you didn't know this, females have a 40% greater chance of surviving severe COVID. They have a more robust response. Also with small infants, if they succumb to infection, females also have a much better response. And in this study, they identify why that is. And it has to do with the expression of what's called a toll-like receptor. And there are different classes of toll-like receptors, 4, 7, 9. And the thing why this assists females in maintaining health and homeostasis and resisting the disease is because these toll-like receptors activate the innate immune cells. And innate immune cells are the cells of the immune system that are the first line of defense when the infection first sets in. And these receptors are encoded on the X chromosome. So since girls have 2 X chromosomes and boys have 1, they have twice as many toll-like receptors. And that helps them resist COVID, and that helps them resist other infections. However, the downside to that is that toll-like receptors can also be associated with autoimmunity. So if toll-like receptor 7 gets overexpressed, there's a variant, and it becomes more sensitive. It's sensitive to actually DNA. Now, why is the immune system sensitive to DNA? Is because bacteria and viruses have RNA and DNA. And so if it sees it there, it begins to think that's a threat. And the toll-like receptors activate the cells to neutralize it. So toll-like receptors and innate immune responses can be good, can be bad. It's a double-edged sword like every other aspect of immunity. So whereas it helps prevent serious illness for females and COVID and other diseases, it also makes females more susceptible to autoimmunity. So again, what we have to do is not necessarily increase the strength, decrease the strength. We have to increase the balance. We want to have an immune system that is rested when there's no threat to take care of, so that it can be active when it needs to be. And that's a main theme and part of the concept underlying the testing that I'm going to describe today. And again, just as a foundational concept that I want to bring out, this is a brief summary of the study we did with folks at the Catholic University of Rome many, many years ago, using our ALCAT test. And there'll be more about the ALCAT test later because we think that's a valuable intervention as an option. And basically, the ALCAT test looks at how innate immune cells respond to foreign substances like foods, chemicals, medicinal herbs, molds, so on and so forth, many different substances. And what they did at the university in Rome was they ran ALCAT tests and identified certain foods which caused a reaction. And they took those same aliquots, which were beef and casein and milk, and then they challenged them with lipopolysaccharide, which resembles a cell wall of bacteria and always activates innate immune cells. But what they found out was that when they did that with aliquots of blood that had reacted to foods, according to ALCAT, the cells were not able to respond. The aliquots of blood where the ALCAT test was negative were able to respond, as well as the controls. So the point I'm making there with that study is that by having the immune system in a state of chronic activation, we're not only laying the groundwork for systemic damage, which we're going to home in on in different areas, but we're also depleting our resources and making it so that we're not able to respond against when we should, when it's appropriate to respond. And just again, briefly looking at more reasons why it's more important now, probably than any other time in recent history, to have a healthy immune system is because of COVID. And one of the things that's been found out is that this was actually documented back in 2008, the synthetic RNA. Of course, we know that some of the vaccines, and by the way, I just want to mention clearly that I'm not a priori against vaccines. I'm in favor of vaccines, but more in the classical sense. Vaccines first came about in 1796 when Edward Jenner in England saw that the ladies who were milking the cows and cowpox was being transmitted to many of them. They would manifest blisters on their hands. And Jenner got the idea that maybe taking some of the material from the blisters from the ladies who were milking the cows and scratching that and exposing that to other people would protect against the human form of pox. And it worked. And so the concept of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger is basically a valid concept. But today, with our genius technologies, we try to go deeper and deeper and deeper and manipulate deeper levels. And maybe that's a good idea in some cases, maybe not. But back in 2008, they discovered that the synthetic RNA component, uracil, would be not just remaining at the local site of injection, but would move around. And the conclusion was that improved properties conferred by pseudouridine. And again, that's one of the 4 nucleosides in RNA, such as modified RNA. It is a promising tool for both gene replacement and vaccination. So, the mRNA vaccines didn't happen yesterday. They've been developing this for a while. And offshoot of that is that patients who are exposed either naturally to the virus or through a vaccine, they tend to show by PCR, viral particles for a long time. And this could help explain why we see long COVID. So this research, which was published just in the beginning of this year, that comes from important institutions, Whitehead Institute, which is part of MIT, and National Cancer Institute, showed that there's there are instances where the RNA is reverse transcribed into the genome of cultured human cells. So that's outside the body. One presumes that reflects what also happened inside the bodies and can be expressed in patient-derived tissues. So unfortunately, we have to face this situation we're in right now. And this could help shed light on why we have long COVID, because A, it persists and our cells can continue to produce it maybe long after we're initially exposed. And B, the only way to get rid of it is to ultimately have strong immune response. So just want to put in perspective why I feel it's very important right now to have a healthy immune system. The immune response to COVID is a key determinant of severity and outcome. And this group published just earlier this year using various omic platforms, proteinomics and PCR and so forth. And they identified that severity is associated with dysregulation of the innate immune system. And again, just briefly, I'll explain this a little bit more. One of the key concepts here is we have the innate immune system, which is the first line of defense. And then we have the specific or adaptive immune system. These are different cells. They integrate, they act like an orchestra, really, even more complex than that. But the first line of defense is innate immunity. And if that doesn't quell the infection, then the adaptive response is activated. And we need both. But if we don't have a strong enough initial response, it becomes a problem. So one of their findings was that patients with mild COVID have lower levels of pro-inflammatory cytokines and higher levels of tissue repair factors, that's more at the end, suggesting the immune responses in mild disease can eradicate the virus. Your immune system is working well, you can deal with it without triggering the hyperinflammatory state. We're going to delve into that a little bit more, but hyperinflammatory state means a cytokine storm. And if the innate immune system is strong, and again, think about the females who have more toll-like receptors, more innate immune system activation, and better outcomes. That's a good thing. If you can overcome it at the beginning, then you don't have to have the immune system, the innate immune system go into hyperdrive and produce a ton of extra cytokines, which itself might be worse than a disease. People can die from a cytokine storm. Severe disease in neutrophils, which are the major innate immune cells. Some of the reactions include upregulation of pro-inflammatory cytokine-encoding genes, as well as upregulation of epigenetic regulators involved in neutrophil activation, like PADI4. PADI4, I just want to introduce now, and I'll define it. It's peptidyl arginine deaminase 4. We're going to talk about this a little bit because this is what triggers NETs. This is an enzyme, and I'll tell you why, how it works. What we're talking about here is netosis, which is required for formation of neutrophil extracellular traps. And severe COVID is associated with a number of distinct immunological signatures, which include high levels of inflammatory cytokines, such as interleukin-1 beta, IL-6, and TNF-alpha. And I'm going to give away a little bit. These are part of our Inflammaging panel. The new Inflammaging assay that we're introducing has 4 basic components. The first one is measurement of the activation of what's called the JAK-STAT pathway. Use measurement of fluorescent intensity in 2 different kinds of cells, monocytes, which are also innate immune cells, and lymphocytes, which are the specific immune cells. When we're stimulated with cytokines, these particular cytokines, IL-6 and interferon alpha, we use flow cytometry. We're going to unpackage all this. So there's other components, we'll get to those one by one, the cytokines, and then a neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio, and optionally a telomere length analysis. So what is JAK-STAT? So I'm going to test your knowledge here. This is a test. Is it A, just another kinase, JAK, or is it named after Jack Black, who loves science, or is it Janus kinase signal transduction and translation? So if you guessed A or B, you're wrong. It is Janus kinase signal transduction and activator of translation. So which cells? Again, we're looking at both specific immune cells and innate immune cells, lymphocytes and monocytes. And they circulate throughout the whole body and reflect the overall inflammatory state of the individual. So we're testing activation of the JAK-STAT pathway in monocytes and lymphocytes, innate immune cells and specific immune cells. And part of our basis for development of our test comes out of several research projects, one done by a group that published in a journal called Cell Systems. Now, we are cell science systems, but no connection there other than that. We're applying a lot of the discoveries that are made. And in a paper they published in Cell Science years ago, they did a study on defective signaling in the JAK-STAT pathway and found out that it tracks with chronic inflammation and cardiovascular risk in aging humans. So it's a little bit of a paradox here. So this immune pathway that has defective signaling is associated with chronic inflammation and heart disease and cardiovascular disease. So they focused on that pathway because it's a sensitive measure for fluctuations in levels of inflammatory mediators, such as those found in higher concentrations in aging individuals. So typically, as we age, the immune system does lose its balance, typically. Unlike acute inflammation, high levels of inflammatory cells and cytokines are produced in response to a known infection or tissue injury. Inflammaging is involved in generalized, milder, chronic inflammatory process. Probably no surprise to anybody. And this term was coined back in 2000, inflammaging. And it's predominantly involving these two inflammatory cytokines, CRP and IL-6. And IL-6 is also part of our panel. And IL-6 induces the liver to synthesize CRP. JAK-STAT is important. It regulates immunity. It's associated with immune disorders. Pathway is regulated in many steps. It's a complex pathway. We're going to show briefly what it is. Positive, negative feedback loops. It's like any other part of the immune system. Positive feedback loops, negative feedback loops, counterbalancing regulatory effect. The immune system's complex. And I know this discussion might seem like we're going in a complex direction, but it's only so that you can first kind of understand the overview of it and then apply it practically, which is actually very, very simple to do. So JAK-STAT, JAK1 and JAK2, you don't see anything in them in the literature about a deficiency in those, because if you have that, you die. So that's kind of indicative of how important it is. So specifically, this cartoon shows the fundamentals of the JAK-STAT pathway. JAK is a kinase which sits at the cell surface. It's kind of a G protein, and there are monomers when the cell's not activated. And a cytokine comes and dimerizes those components and then starts sending signals down the line to the point where the signals reach the genes inside the nucleus and attach to promoter regions, and then gene transcription occurs. And then cytokines, more cytokines can be produced. So that's essentially what this is. So we're measuring that, and we'll show you how. We use this kind of technology you may have heard discussed called flow cytometry, developed in 1965, where it's called flow because cells are in a liquid, just water really, and they're flowing through a zone where lasers, one or more, shine on the cell. Now, the trick is how you treat the cells beforehand, which depends on what you want to measure. So what's cool is that the laser light comes in. And laser, by the way, means light amplification through stimulated emission radiation. If you didn't know that, it means it's a coherent wavelength. And then when it interacts with something else, at least, it's consistent, unlike ordinary light. And so if you want to measure a particular molecule, you can develop or purchase, or someone's developed, a diagnostic antibody that will attach to your target. And then you attach to the antibody a fluorochrome that it has known properties that when interacting with the light will emit other light that can then be detected and converted to electronic signals, so you can indirectly quantitate the amount of that particular target molecule. And so what we're looking for in this particular application is activation of STAT1, STAT3, and STAT5. So these are the important components, they're all important. These are key components in the JAK-STAT pathway, which is such an important immune function. So again, the activation actually occurs through phosphorylation of these enzymes. And so we use bispecific antibodies that bind specifically to STAT1 and also phosphorus, STAT3 and phosphorus. And when they do, they give off light, and we detect the amount of those activated enzymes. Cytokine signaling, this is some of the outcomes of research applying the information that's derived from this testing. Cytokine signaling responses of older adults is reduced. Even if you raise the dose of the stimuli, it's reduced versus young people generally. Reduced responses to cytokine stimulation are primarily due to elevation of basal levels phosphorylated STAT proteins. So the immune system, even at basal levels, is activated. And then again, using the analogy of like the military, you have the infantry, you have the command cells, which is like the innate immune system and so forth. And when it should be resting and not active. But as we get older, because of a lot of different reasons, some of which we're going to kind of explain, the immune system is active when it shouldn't be active. And then when it needs to become active, the resources aren't there. That's one of the problems. So the immune system is in a chronic state of background activation. And the other thing that has been shown is that there's differences in naive and memory cell responses. So I can explain this a little bit more, but now we're talking about the specific cells, the command cells, the ones that remember the infections from a long time ago. And as we get older, we have a greater ratio of memory or terminally differentiated cells that can only respond against one thing. And we produce fewer naive cells that can handle fresh challenges. So that's another feature of an aging immune system. That can be changed too. So reduced signaling responses are associated, here's the bad news, with the atherosclerotic burden, diastolic dysfunction. So this is a big driver of cardiovascular disease. Evidence suggests that this process may be reversed though. So both B and T cells, again, these are the command cells of lymphocytes, B lymphocytes, T lymphocytes. By the way, B lymphocytes are called B cells or B lymphocytes because they mature in the bone marrow. T lymphocytes start there, then go to the thymus where they mature. And there they get to sample while they're sitting in the thymus gland all the antigens from the body, and they learn to not react, hopefully. If they do react, they actually either get depleted or they become anergic. But what we can do is if we can deplete the unresponsive memory cells, at least in mice, we can then increase the generation of fresh naive cells that do properly respond to stimuli. So just digging a little bit deeper on that, in older adults suffering from chronic inflammation, this seems to promote differentiation of adaptive immune cells with an accumulation of highly differentiated, again, memory, T4 and T8 cells. T8 cells are your cytotoxic T lymphocytes, but the features, they're negative the CD28 receptor. And I apologize for all this technical stuff. It's going to be over in a moment, but you'll thank me later. So T cells, the T4 and T8 cells that are CD28 negative are considered the hallmarks of immunosenescence. And also, when they get to that stage, they produce an abundant amount of inflammatory cytokines. So we probably want to not have so many of them, and we probably do want to get rid of them. This is where some dietary factors come in, use of senolytics can be useful, but prevention, of course, is the best thing we can do. So let me explain a little bit, and I think this is the last highly technical bit. Here's a T cell. This could be a CD4 or CD8. CD8s are killer cells. So if you have an infected cell, this is T or CTL, cytotoxic T lymphocyte, will kill it. But these are like command cells. They're pretty powerful. And when pathogens come in, they first have to be processed by an antigen-presenting cell, which could be a macrophage. So let's say the virus comes in. Let's call it a virus. It gets digested in lysosomes. The particles, peptides, are transported by this molecule, an MHC, major histocompatibility, class 2 molecule, to the surface. And then a T cell that has a T cell receptor that recognizes it. That's why they're called specialized, because they only recognize what they're trained to recognize or what they've experienced before. Unless they're naive, then they can have more versatility. But just this transaction alone will not activate the T cell. It needs a secondary stimuli, and that's provided by a B7 molecule on the antigen-presenting cell, binding at the synapse with the CD28, which we were just talking about, a co-stimulatory receptor. If this doesn't occur, this cell doesn't get activated, it becomes anergic. And by the way, that's how we develop tolerance while our T cells are developing in the thymus. If we do react to self-proteins, then this doesn't develop. So that's the significance of not having this. If you don't have this, the T cells are not responsive. And again, that's the hallmark of immunosenescence. So guess what else? Stress, and this paper just came out a couple of months ago, Proceedings of the National Academy of Science. Stress does the same thing. It changes that balance. So let's move on. That's the JAK-STAT component of the Inflammaging. There's three other components. There's the cytokine panel, there's the neutrophil lymphocyte ratio, and an optional telomere length, which we do at our lab, looking at the average length in leukocytes of using quantitative PCR. And by the way, telomeres, when they get short, the cells become senescent, and inflammation does make the telomeres shorter. It's interesting information to have when you're looking at a person's biological age. But now we're going to talk about the inflammatory cytokines, CXCL9 and so forth, CXCL2. We talked a little bit about IL-6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, interleukin-1 beta. Elephant is something that opposes neutrophil elastase, which is very inflammatory, damaging the tissue, causes intestinal barrier loss or compromise in the intestines. So let's look at those individually. CXCL9 is something that's produced by damaged endothelial cells. It's probably the best marker for cardiovascular disease. CXC2 is produced by fibroblasts. It will attract inflammatory monocytes. See, cells can be inflammatory or anti-inflammatory. Inflammatory ones will release prostaglandin E2, and that will actually suppress the adaptive immune response, throw things out of balance. The others are important, but you can come back only in the interest of time. I want to move on and look at those, or you may be familiar with those. The neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio. So neutrophils are the major component of the innate immune cell population. Lymphocytes we talked about, fewer in number, smaller in size, but these cells live for 3, 4, 5, 8 days. These might last for a year. And they're more the command cells. These are the infantry cells. So too high of an innate immune cell response is dangerous. For people in the highest quartile of that ratio, neutrophils and lymphocytes, they have a 2.33 greater likelihood of dying, all-cause mortality, than do people with the lowest quartile of that ratio. And specifically with cardiovascular, it's almost double. So why is that? So the innate immune cells, as we saw, are the first line of defense. They're aggressive. They produce free radicals, can be toxic. They produce toxic mediators, myeloperoxidase, histamine, neutrophil elastase, calprotectin, and so forth. And that's the first line of defense. And girls have more of that activity because of their genetics, as we discussed. And if that succeeds, great. But if it doesn't succeed, the body starts freaking out and entering into a phase called urgent granular poiesis, where a ton of immature neutrophils are produced. And that's how this ratio gets out of whack. And so it's indicative of the fact that there's chronic inflammatory burden. And what does it do? It makes you more likely to die or have cardiovascular disease. So it's very simple to measure. We do that routinely, so that's included in the panel. And again, recruitment of inflammatory monocytes by senescent fibroblasts. And we measure the cytokines that indicate senescent fibroblasts, inhibit antigen-specific tissue inflammation, immunity during human aging. So again, chronic activation of the innate immune system, and again, the familiar cytokines cause inflammation, increases numbers of senescent cells, increases gut permeability, expression of damage-associated molecular patterns, as distinct from pathogen-associated molecular patterns. We talked about this, cell-free DNA or other debris in the body. So Western diet, by the way, can bias or train the innate immune cells to be more responsive. Then a secondary cell comes in and the cells are more aggressive. That's why there's tremendous influence. So chronic and systemic inflammation is thought to be triggered by physical, chemical, or metabolic stimuli. These are the danger-associated or damage-associated molecular patterns, such as those released by damaged cells, activated neutrophils, and environmental insights, generally termed damage-associated molecular patterns, as distinct from pathogens. So these are sterile triggers. This type of inflammation is associated with aging and characterized with being low-grade, persistent, and leading to tissue damage and damage to all the organs. From Nature Aging just last year, a good discussion about what we're talking about, the inflammation aging clock, inflammatory aging clock. Turning now to one of the major damage-associated molecular patterns is DNA, circulating cell-free DNA, which can come from the nucleus or the mitochondria. And this group from England years ago, now again, if you look at the curve you see on PubMed, where they show the amount of publications year over year, it's really accelerating quickly. So 5 years ago, these guys said that they believe that the current knowledge on cell-free circulating mitochondrial DNA is in a rather exploratory phase with the potential for the future to rewrite the pathology of the leading causes of mortality, morbidity, and mortality, such as inflammatory, autoimmune, and cancer, heart disease, stroke, and injury. So I have read, I don't know how many papers on cell-free DNA, because people that we've collaborated with at Yale and other institutions like Georgetown University, with the immune microbiology and immunology folks, and University of Leipzig, we find that when you have a positive ALCAT response, you have the release of toxic mediators, you have the generation of free radicals, but then you also have that mitosis process going on. You have that cell-free DNA. So I do think that this is going to be more and more studied and more implemented. It is implemented. They use DNAs to break down the cell-free DNA to treat cystic fibrosis. And there's a whole ton of other drug approaches that are being explored right now. But basically, you can just cut it off at the pass and, not expose yourself as much as possible to those triggers that activate the cells that result in mitosis or other forms of cell-free DNA. So this is what a neutrophil looks like when it goes into mitosis. It's about 16 times bigger, and obviously it's a good defense, but again, it could be a double-edged sword, as we see, because it can trap viruses and fungi and other pathogens. And then the components include, of course, obviously the membranes, but also the toxic mediators that were inside the granules and the cytosol inside the cell, as well as the material that was inside the nucleus, the chromatin, DNA, and the core proteins that the DNA is wrapped around. And by the way, the DNA, toxic mediators are toxic, free radicals are toxic, but when DNA and certain histone proteins get out into the circulation, they're very toxic. So talking about histone proteins, you may not have known them, but all the DNA is wrapped up. In each cell, there's almost 7 feet of DNA, and it's all compacted. And the DNA is wrapped around these proteins called histones, which we were talking about. And it keeps the DNA nice and tight. So epigenetically, it controls the non-expression of DNA that doesn't need to be. So these are all histones and DNA wrapped around it, expressed, because one cell needs to express so many genes, another cell, other different genes. So this and methylation are the major epigenetic modifiers. These are the publications on NETs in PubMed as of last January. You can see there's thousands of them. NETs in cancer, 3,500. It's half a year ago, more. NETs in inflammation, COVID fatality, cardiovascular disease, dementia, autoimmunity, respiratory, so on and so forth, obesity. You can see how NETs is an important area. And this is how they come about. We have the phagocytosis. If that doesn't work, degranulation, where we spew out toxic mediators to kill things outside, and then the NETs. But in COVID, the NETs support the development of micro immunothrombi, which get into the key organs that kill people from COVID. But coming back to the histones, NETs contain modified histones. They've been modified by that enzyme I mentioned earlier, peptidyl arginine deaminase 4. And then they loosen the control or the condensation of the DNA. See, the histones have a positive electrical charge, the DNA is negative. So it keeps it tightly round. But this enzyme changes that. It citrullonates the arginine component, and chromatin, the DNA and the histones, decompose or decondense and get formed in these nets and get outside. So the nets may spur formation of autoantibodies, are new to the body, and may also serve as scaffolds for thrombosis, as I mentioned. This cartoon shows kind of how that would work with the nets and the histones, which are, as I mentioned before, toxic, causing destruction to endothelial cells, which then produce those cytokines which we're measuring. So we're kind of getting a comprehensive view here. So what led to our involvement with this area is that we collaborated with Yale some years ago. We did a double-blind and placebo-controlled study with people that the Yale group found that had IBS, and they looked at the putting people on either a Alcat diet or sham diet, and looking at how their symptoms changed through a global improvement score, symptom severity score, and the placebo group did okay, but the people following the Alcat did super good. And then they did this proteinomic screening of about 1,100 different proteins and found that when people got better, their elastase got lower. And elastase is one of these toxic mediators inside neutrophils that cause tissue damage and also disrupt tight junctions, causing intestinal permeability. So that also, we're not measuring elastase directly in our profile, but we're measuring elephant, which counteracts it. So it gives us an indirect measurement of the elastase. They, from Yale, found that people had a release of DNA, I mentioned that, following an Alcat positive challenge, not an Alcat negative. This was confirmed, as I mentioned, in another group at Leipzig and Georgetown University. So want to shift now over to like, what do we do about this? So I mentioned throughout this discussion that the biggest drivers of senescence in immunity or aging or inflammaging and causing us to decline in our immune response is chronic activation of the innate immune system. Once you get your baseline level, you want to do something about it, or even if you don't have the baseline level, but you just want to do something about it. One proposal is what we offer called the Alcat test. And the way that works is also a flow cytometric method, except not using fluorescence, just physiochemical responses where the cells also flow through a sensing zone, and we can count and size the cells. And from that, counting and sizing the individual cells, we can generate one at a time. We'll count and size about 7 or 10,000 cells in 8 seconds, and we'll get a size distribution curve. And we get a curve for the control, and then we get a curve for the test sample that's exposed to the food or chemical, and we compare them. So if the cells swell up or ultimately degranulate, you have a dislocation between those two curves. And then we apply statistics to that, compare the two curves. And if it's significant enough, report that out as a positive food or highly reactive or even mildly reactive or chemical, and you stay away from it. And as a result, there's tons of improvement in calming the immune system and eliminating the main factors that are driving immunosenescence and inflammation. Another aspect of this is from the Vedic philosophy, the Tamas guna principle, which is destruction. After these cells react, they need to be cleared away. And in fact, there's 100 billion neutrophils that die every day naturally through apoptosis. They have to be cleared away. And this discovery was made by Mechnikov. Ilya, born in Russia, was called Eli when he moved to Paris and did his research there. And he did get the Nobel Prize for his work, and he is the father of innate immunity. He discovered that there is a phagocytic clearance of cellular debris. So this is very important. This is the garbage collection. And it's an important component of resolving inflammation, restoring function of damaged tissue. After the war's broken out, you go back in and you replant the trees and make everything nice. We now know that phagocytic clearance of dying cells whether they die normally through apoptosis or necrosis or netosis, especially if it's necrosis or pyroptosis, netosis. It's super important to clear that stuff up, as we see, because it causes problems there. It's very inflammatory. We don't want so much of it circulating around. And by the way, there's a lot of it, particularly by macrophages, big eaters, and other immune phagocytes. Has profound consequences on the innate adaptive immune response. As I was saying, 100 billion neutrophils die every day. How much DNA is that? It's enough, one person has enough DNA in their body to, if it fully extended end to end, would go from one edge of the solar system to the other and back again. So it's important that it gets cleared up. So getting close to time, so it's important that this happens. There are, believe it or not, these are scientific terms, find me and eat me signals. These dead cells express these things so that the macrophages can find them and eat them. They do that by binding integrins on the macrophages on the surface. But guess what? These nets are so diabolical, they block that. So not only do you have more junk, but you're preventing the garbage collecting from taking place. This is seen when you avoid the triggers. Tons of studies show improvement all across the different organ systems. We report out these results as being severe or non-reactive at all, moderate or in between. And let's just talk now about the other aspect of what neutrophils do. They produce free radicals. They're important, but again, when the system is overactivated, there's too much production of free radicals. The danger is they deform protein molecules, disrupt structures, and they also attack and destroy DNA. They also cause suppression of sex hormone production because you produce more cortisol instead. It causes attrition of the telomeres. Every time the telomeres get too short, you increase the risk of cardiovascular disease. We found these activated neutrophils in greater abundance in people with dementia. It drives dementia. Myeloperoxidase from neutrophils is a better marker than LDL to predict cardiovascular disease. It drives preeclampsia in women. It damages sperm cells in men. We have a lot of that going on right now. The other thing we do is we want to nourish the specific immune cells. Based on some early studies, it was shown that if you irradiate spores, and people won the Nobel Prize for this as well, you radiate spores, they can no longer multiply. In their experiment, Beadle and Tatum did that, and then added back micronutrients and found that when they reached arginine, they were able to restore reproduction of the cells. That's important. So what we do to determine micronutrient deficiencies is take the lymphocytes that, of course, need to divide. Unlike the innate immune cells, the lymphocytes are smaller in number, last for a long time, and when an infection comes again, they then divide, and their ability to divide is dependent upon their nutritional status. So what we do very simply is we get the whole blood, separate the lymphocytes, add it back to the patient's own serum, so that's the normal situation, stimulate with a mitogen, which means mitosis generator, to make the cells divide, and add micronutrients one at a time. And we look at the growth rate compared to the patient's baseline. And the reasonable inference is that the addition of a specific micronutrient improving cell proliferation indicates that there's suboptimal levels there. So what we're doing is we're using a series of tests, the Inflammaging panel, to see where you're at. And then looking at, and you can use whatever tests you're comfortable with. If for some reason the outcat test doesn't make sense to you, then, but you have to look at what's causing chronic activation of the innate immune system. So you have to look at diet. And then to improve immune function, specific immunity, we want to see what micronutrients will do that. And that's what our cellular nutrition assays are about. And it's reported in that way. We test about 50 items. And if they show a big reaction, we report that as red, or if it's sufficient, it's green. We do the same thing. We stress the cells and see how well they survive. We call that the redox assay. Based on that, we stress the cells and then add in botanical and nutritional antioxidants and see how well they're protecting them. And the same thing is reported out as either sufficient or beneficial. And again, we test about 50 different items there. So overall, this is the way we think you can go. Assess immune function, status health with the looking at immunosenescence and inflammatory cytokine test, the Inflammaging panel. Use LCAT or whatever else you want to do to avoid sterile triggers of inflammation. Most important thing you can do. Then consume foods and nutrients that support immune function based on cellular nutrition assay or whatever tests you're comfortable with. And then use supplements judiciously, preferably foods, and then look at it again whenever you feel it's appropriate to do so. And I just want to say thank you to you guys for listening for all this time. I really appreciate having this opportunity. I'm very thankful to Rupa for inviting me to speak. If there's any time left, I'm happy to answer any questions. If not, I'm happy to have, I will answer them to you personally.
Yeah, no worries. We can definitely go through some questions. We got some great ones coming through the chat. And just so everybody is aware, of course, we are at the top of the hour. So if you have to jump, no worries. We will record everything and send out a recording your way once we've had the opportunity to edit. So Roger, how much time do you have? We got some really good questions.
I've got all day.
Okay, perfect.
This is what I do.
The first question is, from your perspective, what can be inferred about the bodies of those individuals who are sensitive to seemingly everything, foods, light, sounds, EMF, etc.? The functional medicine world, from what I gather, is mostly pointing to troubles with methylene, but what else and could be going on in these cases?
So I'm sorry, the functional medicine, I didn't hear that word.
Yeah, so it's, they say that functional medicine seems to be pointing towards methylation, excuse me.
Methylation.
Yep, but what else could be going on here?
Well, I think methylation is super important. We do a test to look for the SNPs for the methylation, and you can repeat, you can address that by supporting the deficient enzymes, which are genetic and so forth. But, there's been a lot of cases like this, and you might have to go in stages, but we've seen people who are on literally 80 milligrams of cortisone a day because they've got this, inflammation that will kill them. We do an LCAT test, and even though they're on the cortisone, which suppresses inflammation, they're still having reactions, so we can do an LCAT test. And then they go off those foods, and it's a new world. So, curbing the triggers of inflammation as much as you can is foundational. Now, of course, some patients, fortunately, it's few and far between, are pan-allergic, and as this questioner is saying, they're kind of sensitive to everything. Well, I would still recommend first step, you could do a methylation test and look at that. But I think fundamentally an LCAT test for the foods and chemicals, and then just try and remediate as best as possible. I hope that helps. Maybe they've already tried that and that hasn't worked. And I would say chronic inflammation is more foundational than methylation. Methylation is super important. To produce these methyl donors, methylation is these methyl molecules bind to in promoter regions of the genes, they suppress the expression of those genes. So that's super important. So you have less chaos that way. But fundamentally, what I've seen, my sense is you've got this environment, that's important, that should be done. But fundamentally, you've got a dysregulated immune system for sure. So you do both those things.
Perfect. Can the LCAT test determine acute versus chronic inflammation?
Not in the present form, but we're doing some research. We're going to maybe launch some new diagnostics that are LCAT plus, perhaps next year, where we're going to actually phenotype the subpopulations of granulocytes. And so principally, there's three broad types of granulocytes, which are the innate immune cells, neutrophils, which we talked about a lot, which are the predominant ones, eosinophils and basophils. Basophils and also eosinophils are typically associated with more of the type 1 or immediate hypersensitivity reactions. So now they're all together, and the method we're using is non-specific. So we just see overall this population of cells is reacting or not reacting. But in the future, we're going to also phenotype which specific subpopulations. So the answer is not now, we cannot. So what do you do right now if you want to look for immediate type hypersensitivity or type 1 classical allergic reaction? history usually gives you a good idea, but you can confirm it or you can try with a RAST test. So everybody does RAST testing, which is an allergen-specific IgE. It's probably fairly good. Some labs, few specialized labs, do basophil degranulation. That might even be better if you really want to home in and find out what triggers immediate type reactions. Nothing is better for delayed type reactions than ALCAT.
Perfect. What inflammaging patterns have you noticed in those who have multiple autoimmune conditions relative to those who have one?
We haven't gone that far that we've done clinical research that I can answer that question, but I do think that multiple patterns. You see, there's a genetic basis for autoimmunity too. Some of it has to do with antigen recognition, and some of it has to do with the expression of molecules on cells that make them more susceptible. But what's really interesting is that more and more we're seeing a lot of increase of autoimmunity amongst people who don't have the so-called genetic risk, which differs according to the different kind, which leads me to believe it's more of a non-specific chronic inflammatory process where you have too many damps, which are primarily cell-free DNA and net components. And there's also other things called ETs, which are eosinophil extracellular traps, and BETs, which are basophil extracellular traps, but they're fewer numbers and less significant. Again, I really believe I hate to sound like I'm just promoting what my lab does, but I've been doing it for almost 37 years. And I've never seen anything like resolve these complicated issues like following an ALCAT program.
Yeah, perfect. Other than age, which of course is a sizable factor in determining one's immunity, what are key determinants that influence how quickly a challenged immune system collapses further or bounces back resiliently?
It's a whole gestalt. It's not, it's an aggregate of all the different things, most of which of course are lifestyle. So mental stress and physical exposures, lack of things that can be used to counteract, that can help the body degrade damps, senolytics. So I'm not an expert in this, but there's a bunch of people now doing stuff with various light waves and body temperatures and breathing and so forth. They call it biohacking. And it's fascinating, and I think it's worth looking into, but I don't know that much about it. But yeah, it's a gestalt. There's no one thing. But except I believe environmental exposures is the biggest. And the other thing is stress. And if someone asks me, once or twice I've given a presentation and someone says, okay, give us the one thing that you think is best to deal with all these issues. And what I always come down to is this: be a nice person. If you're a nice person, it comes back to you. You feel good about it. Try and always develop your philosophical understandings about your fellow man and put yourself in their shoes and be nice. And just think how if we just did that one simple, easy thing, how different, because whenever we get agitated or negative, it's got knock-on effects. But importantly, whenever we're positive, it has knock-on effects. And there's another thing, even though we talked a lot about science today, one of the expressions that I really like is we have a German lab, I spent a lot of time in Germany. One of the expressions I heard over there was this. It's an old expression: the dumbest farmers grow the biggest potatoes. And it means, being one who's in harmony with their environment and their surroundings and their society, or well, in this case, in their environment, the one who just is simple and just is in harmony has the biggest success in nature, grows the biggest potatoes. So never forget that. I mean, all the science is great. It's great to understand why and how, but I don't think it's great to get obsessed over it. It's good to use it, get the information, understand it's reliable and what its application is, but that's it. It's just then now get down to business. And the business is what functional medicine people do.
Yeah, can't be overstated. Just be a good person. What are the different ways that telomere length and other telomere-related information is gleaned other than qPCR and other, or how do you do other testing methods, compare and contrast with qPCR and what?
So the main other method is called FISH, which is an acronym. It's not a little swimming animal. It's a fluorescein in situ hybridization. And there's some techniques, and there's a lab in Spain that's developed some techniques. And I know that they have a lot of academic involvement where you can drill down and get more precision on a particular cell, so you can look at the shortest telomere length. We don't do that because it's more expensive, and we want to just use this as a guide. If you want to diagnose if someone has cancer, you might use FISH. But if you want to just get a baseline for, how a person's cells are aging, look at the average, because it's just a more comprehensive picture. So FISH and qPCR are the only two techniques I'm familiar with. There are probably I'm sure there are some other applications you can use with analytical chemistry, but I know of them and I'm not familiar with them.
Perfect. Yeah. So we got time for about 2 more questions. What inventions have you seen move the needle most significantly when it comes to lowering cytokinins? And just how soon have you observed those changes take place? Like, what is the period of time? Weeks, months, years?
Lowering inflammatory cytokines? Was that the question?
Exactly.
Avoiding the triggers of inflammation.
Yep.
What
is generally the time frame that you've seen, avoiding those types of stresses to have an impact?
Days.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Tissue, depending upon where it is in the body, might take lesser or greater amount of time to heal, but you can turn the corner like super, super fast, 4 days.
Perfect. So we might have time for 2 more now. What are the thoughts and research around resetting the immune system with long-term fasting?
Long-term fasting can reduce inflammatory burden, and there's been some stuff published in New England Journal says that long-term fasting that's timed is not more efficient than random calorie restriction. But calorie restriction does decrease metabolic activity, does decrease formation of free radicals. There's the counter side to that too. You need to be nourished. So, we want to eat good quality food. We want to digest it properly. We want to have healthy digestion. We don't want intestinal permeability. We want absorption. What else? Assimilation. Yeah. So, I don't think there's a simple answer to that I have. By the way, Amy Bizarker's here, and I forgot to mention, although I wanted to, that she runs our sister company, which provides free dietary counseling and lifestyle counseling to people who have any of our tests. So it's available to you as a practitioner if you want to get accustomed to our test, or you want to send your patient to us for a free consultation to interpret any of the tests that we have. Or if you're not comfortable doing that, fine. But sorry for the digression, but the thing is, again, it's a gestalt, so everything you've got to improve its simulation, digestion, mood plays a role, exposures play a role. Exercise is super important. Exercise is good for everything. People have to move. People have to use their minds. People have to use their minds appropriately, be positive.
All right. So final question we got time for is, how do the leukocytes and monocytes on a standard blood differential test compare to the leukocytes and monocytes tested having to do with JAK-STAT?
So they're the same. Monocytes are cells that are in the circulation, so you can test for CBC. And they mature into dendritic cells, or they can differentiate into macrophages, which are in the tissues. And we talked about macrophages, big eaters, that are kind of clean things up. So they're the same cells. Is there another aspect to that question?
The final part of it was, how do they compare with having to do with JAK-STAT?
Oh, well, JAK-STAT is an important immune pathway. So it's not the only immune pathway, obviously, but it's an important pathway for activating the immune system. And what we're testing is monocytes and lymphocytes, because the monocytes represent innate immune cells, the lymphocytes adaptive immune cells. So we have those two represented there. And And again, the upshot of this is that when the immune cells are chronically activated, that's a negative thing because that produces damage to the body and aging, and all these things we talked about. What we're looking at when we stimulate that particular pathway, and it's expressed in other cells as well, but those are major cells. When we stimulate it, we want to see a response. We want to see a response. And by the way, so we're measuring the response. We're also measuring, and I should mention, we're going to launch this. Our target date is October 1st, not yet today. We're going to be measuring the basal level because that's what causes the problem. That's a good indication that there's too much background or basal activation, which produces inflammation and aging, and then depresses the ability to respond. And we want to also look at, and we're doing it in a couple of different ways with the neutrophil lymphocyte ratio and then the JAK-STAT pathway, that there's a balance there. We don't want overactivation in the innate system to the detriment of the ability of the specific system, lymphocytes, to respond. I hope that helps.
Absolutely. Roger, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Other than giving, Amy a quick shout out, any other final things you want to plug or let the people know who are joining us today?
I hope you enjoyed it. And I really appreciate your work and what you're doing, trying to help people. And you're my favorite people.
I love it.
Thanks.
That's
Thanks,
perfect.
Rupa. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And Roger, you're welcome to hop off. And for those folks who are able to actually stick around for another 10 minutes or so, I would love to show you a little bit about Rupa Health and how you can order the tests that were talked about today during Roger's presentation, as well as a whole host of other ones. So I'm just going to go ahead and just share my screen and really just jump right into it. So again, for those of you who are able to stick around, thank you so much for some time. My name is Adrian Martinez, as I said in the introduction. I'm the head of practitioner partnerships here at Rupa Health. And really what my role here beyond hosting these live classes is to be that frontline person speaking to practitioners, answering questions about our platform. To start off, some of you might not even know who Rupa Health is and why we're hosting these live classes with organizations like Cell Science Systems, right? So what we are is we're a functional lab platform. We've created a platform that's designed to make life easier, specifically when it comes to lab testing. As I'm sure you know, if you're on this call, functional lab tests can be quite comprehensive, right? There can be a lot of work that goes into it. And so what we've done is we've created a platform that has over 30 different labs in one place, of course, including Cell Science Systems, but also other top labs, right? Dutch, Genova, DNARX, Doctors Data, all these top functional labs. So you just need one single login and you're able to order from all the labs in one place without having to go to each individual portal to do so. It's free to sign up for. All you need to be is licensed to order the labs directly with an NPI number, and you're able to create an account with us. I'll show you exactly how that works right now. So starting an order on Rupa is so simple, but what I'm showing you first is this lab test catalog. What's really cool in here is, again, there's over 3,000 different tests on Rupa, but you can hop in and even check out the whole lab catalog, as well as even compare tests. And to answer your question, no, there's no yearly free. It's completely free to sign up for, free to navigate. And let's say I want to hop in and compare maybe some Dutch tests, right? Let's hop in. I want to compare the Dutch test. I'm just going to throw a few random ones here. GI map from Diagnostic Solutions, Mycotox, you name it, right? Let's go ahead and see that comparison. And what it's going to do is bring up all these tests that I want to see and compare all the necessary information about them, right? Of course, cost, I can download a sample report. I can see exactly what methods are used for processing. I can download copies of the sample instructions, see what the turnaround times are. I can, of course, get the lab company information and even the biomarkers all available here. Our goal here is to make things as transparent as possible and simple, not only for you as a practitioner, but also your patients to be able to navigate this functional medicine testing. So what does that all look like, right? What does it look like when I place an order on Rupa Health? Super easy, right? I click that button up there on the top right where it says start an order. And I just need the patient's first name, last name, and email address. From there, it'll bring me right into my order screen where I'm able to customize my orders for specific patients and by patient. So at the top here, right, you're able to see that we can create custom bundles. A bundle is a set of tests, a set of labs that we work with, and a combination of any one of the labs that we work with. So if I want to create an Inflammaging bundle, I just have one click, and a lot of those tests that we're chatting about today during Roger's presentation will be added straight into my cart. The idea here, of course, is customized bundles, one click, everything I need to add into my cart straight away. All right, boom, super easy. Below that, you'll see that I can actually create a favorites list. So individual tests that I commonly order, again, from any one of the tests. If I want to order Great Plains oats test, if I want to order, the ALCAT test from Cell Science Systems, and you name it, right? One click, add it into my cart straight away. And if I am looking for a specific test, I have access to the whole catalog down below. From there, it really is as simple as clicking send to patient. We operate primarily on a drop ship to the patient, so you don't have to stock the kits in office. We'll drop ship these kits directly to your patients, and it will make things as seamless as possible. No more having to worry about kits going bad while they're in your inventory. But there is some more customizations that we can do, right? So up here at the top, you'll see that we can do things such as scheduling orders out. If I want to schedule this order to be sent directly to my patient, let's say they're maybe on a program and I want to retest them in 6 weeks, I can automate that process. Additionally, if there's any add-on tests available, it's as simple as clicking add-on test available, and I can add any add-on test that I want to add. Go ahead and remove this one. Let's talk about how our pricing works. So our pricing is very transparent. We offer wholesale practitioner prices. So what that means is the same price that you would get having an account directly with any of the labs. Those are the prices that we offer. You'll notice here 2 prices. We have the patient price grayed out over here on the left-hand side, and that practitioner price. Independent of whether you're paying or your patient's paying, we're always going to offer this lower price. So there's huge potential savings for your patients depending on how you manage billing. The way that we generate our revenue is very simple. We charge a 7% processing and ordering fee on each order. Okay, so 7%, that's how we generate our revenue. Beyond that, there's no other cost to sign up for Rupa. And this 7% is paid for by whoever's paying for the tests. So if you're having us bill your patient directly, what that means is that the patient will be the one, in this case, paying $20, still saving $50 total, and Rupa is free for you. Okay, you do have the option of paying for the tests yourself. In that case, you do manage billing outside of our platform. But if you don't want to handle billing, right, get one more thing off your plate, we can take care of that for you. You can add notes for the patient. You can add notes for Rupa. You can add ICD-10 codes. Currently, we don't accept insurance directly, but you can add these ICD-10 codes. We have a full catalog designed and built into here, so you can just add whatever you need to. You just need a keyword. And we're actually coming out with automatic and automated super bills as well. For now, what we'll do is we'll help walk your patient through the process. Again, something else that you don't have to do. We'll walk your patient through the process of how to create a super bill and submit that for insurance. Other than that, you go ahead and click send to patient. And that's how you order from over 30 different labs, over 3,000 different tests in a matter of seconds here on Rupa Health. But there's more, right? So beyond just a place where you can order all your labs, we want to be able to take care of the patient experience, because that is vital, right? That is so important. Is ensuring that the patient is taken care of. So as soon as you place that order on Rupa Health, we can effectively take it from there. So we can bill the patient directly. We'll go ahead and drop ship the kits directly to the patient. We'll send over instructions and FAQs. We'll send over oftentimes videos on how to take the test. We'll handle any specimen issues. We'll manage any support questions. We can even coordinate phlebotomy. So if there is a blood draw required, we can actually take care of that as well. And we'll follow up with the patient also. So we'll check in, we'll see how they're doing, see if they have any questions. Our compliance rates are above 85%, which are far higher than industry standards. And then from there, you're notified, which I'll show you here in a moment. So what does it all look like? As soon as you place that order, here's what your patient sees. They'll see a notification. Hi, Jordan, or Dr. Jordan has ordered these tests for you. We'll introduce who we are. And a really important thing to call out here is that we actually accept more than just cash and credit. We can accept HSA, we can accept FSA, as well as we can even set up a 3-month interest-free payment plan with the patient. In that case, we'll go ahead and send those kits after the very first installment. So one of the ways that we're lowering the barrier to get access to these oftentimes very expensive tests is through these different payment solutions. From there, we'll follow up and collect all the necessary information to complete the order. And then you'll be notified, or your patient will be notified as the kits will be shipped out. Next, we'll go ahead and send over an email that looks similar to this. This walks them through all the necessary instructions for their different tests. If there are different tests, we'll walk them through how to fill out the requisition form. And if there is a blood draw required, we can either customize that information based on your recommendation, or we can go ahead and send over the options based on the lab that they're working with. Each lab having their own directory of phlebotomists. We will send over those options directly to your patient. But what's really cool about Rupa is the buck doesn't stop there. If your patient needs any support, they reach out to us. If your patient even wants a different phlebotomy option, let's say that your patient wants a mobile phlebotomist to come to them to draw their blood, they can reach out to our team. We actually have a built-in full catalog of phlebotomists within our network as well. And if there is available phlebotomists additionally on top of that, we'll go ahead and send those to your patient. The idea here is for you to not have to worry about all the heavy lifting that can oftentimes be associated with these tests. You come to Rupa, you order all your tests in one place. We take care of the whole patient experience, and then you're notified as the results come in. Last thing I'm going to show you real quick is exactly what it looks like to track all your orders. So rupahealth.com, right? Log in again, just to recap, free to sign up for, free to navigate, play around on, and you're actually able to track all your orders here as well. So once you place that order, it'll be brought into this main screen here. I can search by patient. I can filter by status because we will update the status of each of your orders as they go along the process. And you're able to see, hey, here's 4 different tests from 4 different labs. I'm able to see when it's estimated to come in, when the results arrived at the lab, and when the results are arrived, I'm able to download them. I can send them to my patient. We won't send the results to your patient without your consent. You can even schedule a clinical consultation. So as Roger mentioned before, he works with Amy for their clinical consultation. So if you do want some assistance interpreting the results, you can schedule some time directly with the labs that we partner with. If you are working with an EHR, such as Practice Better or Elation or Optimantra, we actually integrate with them as well. So those results, once they're in, will actually flow directly into your EHR system. And finally, the last thing I do want to show you is Rupa University. You're all part of Rupa University. For those 55 of you who are sticking around for this, thank you so much for spending some time with me this afternoon. Rupa University is the educational leg of Rupa Health. So this live class with Roger and Cell Science Systems is one that we actually put on every week with different labs. So you'll be able to hop into here and you can see what we have coming up in the future. Next week, we have one coming up with IGeneX on tick-borne illnesses. We have Behind the Curtain of Mycotoxin. We have the HUMAP, which is a new map coming out from doctors' data. So all of these classes are coming in, and these are the ones coming up, and anything previous that we've done, you'll see them here as well. So you'll see the one that we just did last week with Gemelli Biotech. This is free resources that are available to you. So this is it. This is exactly what Rupa Health is. So not only a place where you can come and order all your tests, but also a place where you can come and continue to learn. We have articles that we create. We have a podcast. It's free to sign up for. And if you do have any questions, please reach out to me. Again, my name is Adrian Martinez. I'm the head of practitioner partnerships here at Rupa Health. And if you would like to set up some time with me, I would love to chat with you. We can set up some time, go through the whole platform again. I can answer any questions. Phone support, Christine, I see that. We hear it. We're working on it. We hope to have that in the future. It's honestly right now just a manpower thing. We're a relatively small company, which is kind of crazy to think about. So phone support is something that we definitely have in mind, and hopefully we'll be able to provide that. Right now, it's all internet support, but if there is a necessity to hop on a call, our team will definitely do that. But if you have any questions, please reach out to me again. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We look forward to seeing you in the future, and keep an eye out for a couple emails coming your way. I'll send out an email with a bit of feedback. So if you could please give us some feedback, that would be so much appreciated. And lastly, I'll send out just a follow-up email to keep an eye out for the recording. But enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Thanks so much. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.